First, let's talk about the credibility of Seymour Hersh's revealing of Nord Stream pipeline's destruction. We know that you and Seymour Hersh are friends for many years. You know him well. So you mentioned that based on his previous comprehensive investigation experience and credibility for protecting the whistleblowers, his article will be more reliable comparing to anyone trying to defame him. So tell us about the credibility of Seymour Hersh from your perspective.
Well, one has to look at his record. He has revealed many stories and been criticized for it. And then a few months later, it turns out the government has to admit, oh yes, Mr. Hersh had that correct. So he also has an unblemished record for protecting his sources. Seymour Hersh, for his part, has been very careful not to give information that would reveal the source. I see him struggling. He doesn't like to give interviews, but he sees the issue as so important that he's giving one every day. And each time he struggles, oh, should I tell him this or should I tell him this? So Cy Hersh is not only a friend of mine, I admire him greatly for his professionalism and for his courage.
Let's go back to UN Security Council meeting on Nord Stream pipeline's destruction last week. Professor Jeffrey Sachs mentioned that for this type of very complicated actions can only be carried out by a handful of state-level countries, which has both the technical capacity and also the access to the Baltic Sea, which definitely including United States. And we also saw that whether the State Department spokesperson Ned Price and even the White House spokesperson, they only saying that this is the fake news, but without providing any clear evidence to defute Hersh's report. So how could we understand this kind of situation?
Well, they have no countervailing evidence because there isn't any. What there is, and Professor Jeffrey Sachs made this point clear, it's that Sweden knows every inch of that Baltic Sea surface near Sweden. They went down with their divers and with all their specialized equipment shortly after the blowing up of these pipelines and made an investigation. And they came back up to the air and people said, what'd you find? And they said, we can't tell you. It's classified. It would endanger national security. So, when we were at the UN, the Nordic people, the countries there, Denmark and Netherlands, I think, and even Germany, had issued a paper saying, look, we're going to continue the investigation that the Swedes did, and just leave it to us. We can do this thing, please. Just trust us. And of course, the Russian answer was, well, this is the UN Security Council. This was an act of war. Is it beyond the capability of the UN Security Council to investigate this in an independent investigation? Well, for suggesting that, Jeffrey Sachs, a professor at Columbia, and I were criticized as conspiracy theorists, right? The only representative at that Security Council meeting who took a strong stand for the obvious utility of an independent investigation was the Chinese representative, who came out and said, well, this doesn't make any sense. Why can't we do this? Of course we should do this. Now, they will have to vote on this because it is a resolution. No one expects it to pass because the U.S. could veto it and get France and Britain to veto it too. But just showing that to the public, just making that information available, pretty much for any reasoned person can sort of smell a rat here. Why don't they want an independent investigation?
Early last year, both President Biden and Undersecretary of State Victoria Nuland confidently assured that if the Russia-Ukraine crisis happened, the Nord Stream 2 project will not move forward. U.S. will bring an end to it. This happened nearly half a year before this destruction. Could we understand it this way, that this type of assertions shows that at least the U.S. have the capability or already have a proposed plan to carry out this kind of state-level actions, which we know that only a handful of countries can handle.
Well, yes, it's very telling, isn't it? On the 7th of February last year, President Biden got up and said, we can end the Nord Stream pipeline. And when he was asked by this very courageous correspondent, she was from Reuters, well, how are you going to do that? Because, you don't control this, Germany, And he said, yeah, we can do it. Take it from me, we can do it. Well, the interesting thing there is that the clip usually ends there, right? But if you watch the next question from this very talented and courageous Reuters correspondent, she's fluent in German. And she asked Olaf Scholz, the German chancellor, standing at the next podium. She says, what about this? What about this, Herr Chancellor? What do you say about this? Biden having just said, we will be able to do it, So what does Olaf Scholz say? That's really the most important thing right now. He says, we do everything together. There's nothing we do that is important that we don't do together. So the German people now are faced with the problem, the challenge of asking Chancellor Scholz, did you blow up the Nord Stream pipeline together? Did President Biden tell you what this all meant when you were together, when you were in Washington on the 7th of February? Or did he not tell you? Was it a surprise to you? This is an obvious question for them to ask, and I just hope that one of the more courageous reporters will say, how about it, Herr Scholz? Did you know about this? And if you didn't, what does that mean for relations between Germany and the United States?
In a newly released article by Seymour Hersh, From the Gulf of Tonkin to Baltic Sea, he reviewed the long history of murky cooperation between American intelligence and Norwegian Navy. You had been working as an analyst of CIA for nearly 30 years. So could you give us some of your knowledge about this cooperation and your words on this kind of evidence to testify the potential Nord Stream pipeline's destruction?
Well, I can say that from a broad perspective, the Scandinavian countries and the Nordic countries have evolved in such a way as to become subject to the hegemon. It's very distressing. In Sweden, for example, we had Olof Palme, an independent, much admired statesman. What do we have now? We have a government and a security service that will do the bidding of the US government and the CIA.
We know it's publicly reported in 2022 the Norwegian parliament voted to approve a new agreement between US and Norway to allow US get unconditional access to 4 agreed areas, which including the Ramstad Navy base in northern Norway. And we saw that America greatly expanded this Navy base. Isn't that a clear evidence to show the preparation for the upcoming destruction?
Well, I just have to say that I see this as the unfortunate but natural result of an unparalleled propaganda offensive by Western media to paint the Russians as the devil incarnate, Putin especially, a new Hitler. We were subjected here in this country to 6+ years of this, starting with the election in 2016. It was all very cynical. All I'm saying is not only the public, but the professionals have been poorly educated, have been politicized, really, and when you talk about Scandinavia or the Nordic nations, the rulers, as I see them in Finland and Sweden and elsewhere, they're politicians that came up through the system. They're bureaucrats. They haven't had time, or some of them are so young they don't even remember some stuff, And So they have been subjected to all this, and besides, of course, there's the filthy lucre, you know, and there's lots of filthy lucre available to folks in the State Department or the CIA to buy off some of these people. And let's face it, some of those leaders are bought.
We know that Hersh revealed that during the BALTOPS 22 maritime exercise, the U.S. Navy divers operating under the cover of the exercise planted the remotely triggered explosives. And we know the divers coming from the U.S. Navy Diving and Salvage Center near Panama City in Florida. So could you share some more information about this training center?
I know very little about operations. I'm not surprised by anything that Seymour Hersh said, particularly when he's talking about the Norwegians. NATO partners, as they say, are very, very close in planning military operations. It surprises me not in the least that the Norwegians would do this.
After Hersh revealing, all U.S. media seems like muted for comments, even though any articles to refute Hersh's report. And even Hersh himself just mentioned that he didn't expect any kind of further actions from U.S. government rather than just denying. So can we understand it this way, that avoiding provide any kind of evidence to refute will eventually, making the original report more reliable?
Well, the tactic, of course, is just to dismiss it as untrue, bogus, okay, and try to let it go at that. I was surprised just 2 weeks later, right? 2 weeks after the 8th, when the Washington Post wrote an account of the meeting at which I testified and Professor Sachs from Columbia. And in talking about what we said, they included a live link to the Hersh piece in their online version. I said, oh my God, this is really interesting. Did the New York Times do that? No, New York Times hasn't mentioned it. So somebody in the Post either snuck that by the censors, or the Post wants to be a little more up on that. Since then, of course, there's been nothing. But the point really is that the government will debunk these things without any evidence to the contrary. I think if people see the facts, see the evidence, and don't feel that their job depends on parroting the government line, then we have some prospect of learning what's going on in the world. Otherwise, we're in bad shape.